Like at my desk. Yeah. But I think I took it home to use it at home one time. Test.
Welcome to the Subcommittee on Energy and Environment. The subcommittee will come to order. Today, the subcommittee will consider 3 bills. The first bill the subcommittee will mark up today is H.R. 3276, the American Medical Isotopes Production Act, which Mr. Upton and I introduced. The bipartisan bill aims to solve the ongoing crisis in nuclear medicine. Normally, 50,000 medical procedures are performed every day in the United States, including cancer scans and brain imaging using a medical isotope that is nuclear in nature. But due to the breakdown earlier this year of the Canadian nuclear reactor, which produced more than 60% of the United States supply of this isotope, a serious supply shortage has resulted. Shockingly, the United States has 0 domestic capacity to produce this nuclear isotope and relies upon aging reactors in other countries. H.R. 3276 will set the United States upon a smart and sustainable path for medical isotope production here at home. The bill will also close a loophole in the United States nuclear nonproliferation law by ending the export of bomb-usable highly enriched uranium for medical isotope production. The American Medical Isotope Production Act has drawn the unanimous support of industry, doctors' groups, and nuclear nonproliferation advocates. This is a good bipartisan bill. I thank my friend, Congressman Fred Upton, for his excellent work and his staff's excellent work on this bill. The second bill we will consider today is H.R. 3258, the Drinking Water System Security Act of 2009. This legislation closes what the Department of Homeland Security refers to as a security gap for drinking water facilities by creating a new security regime at the Environmental Protection Agency that ensures that they upgrade security and switch to safer processes or technologies when it is economically and technologically feasible for them to do so. This legislation has been endorsed by the Blue-Green Coalition of Environmental and Labor Organizations and also the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies, whose member utilities provide safe drinking water to more than 125 million Americans. Similarly, H.R. 2868, the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Act of 2009, will comprehensively close security gaps at chemical facilities, in part because for the first time the Department of Homeland Security will have the authority to require each high-risk facility to assess whether it could use safer processes or technologies and provide authority for the Department to also ensure that the highest risk facilities do so if it is economically and technologically possible. As a former member of the Homeland Security Committee and as a member who attended too many funerals of Bostonians who were on those 2 planes that were hijacked from Logan Airport, I think it is very, very important for us to send a signal to terrorists that they will not be successful, and that is what we are trying to do here today. So this is I think, a very good set of bills, which I recommend to the members. We've worked very closely with the minority in order to achieve the success which we have. And I'd like to, at this point, turn and recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton, for his opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for our markup this morning, I view that we have 1 bill that truly is bipartisan and 2 that I feel need some work. But I must say that I appreciate the movement in a positive direction. I applaud you for working with me on the American Medical Isotope Production Act. The changes being offered today do reflect a bipartisan compromise that certainly improves the legislation. H.R. 3276 addresses a looming crisis in nuclear medicine by ensuring a robust and reliable supply of the most critical medical isotopes that are produced in the United States. Every year, 16 million medical procedures in the U.S. rely on the import of isotope Moly-99. That's 50,000 per day, and we import 100% of our supply of this critical isotope. The Canadian reactor that for decades has been the source of over 60% of our Moly-99 is now offline and may never get back online. Without a proper supply of the critical isotope, tens of thousands of patients a day are going to be impacted. And they will be affected in a major way. Among the other uses, these isotopes are used in procedures for the detection and staging of cancer and the detection of heart disease. But the important medical issues here at home are only half the story. Apparently this weekend, another story in the Washington Post, quote, Iran seeks deal for reactor, points out how the production of medical isotopes is playing out in nuclear talks with Iran. Iran is seeking more fuel to produce medical isotopes to meet the 10,000 patients a week in their country. If H.R. 3276 is successful in getting the technology online to create medical isotopes from low-enriched uranium, instead of the more dangerous, highly enriched uranium used today, Iran's need to import more nuclear material will be diminished. So, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to working with you as we move this important bill out of committee and onto the House floor. Unfortunately, the other two bills, H.R. 3258, the Drinking Water System Security Act of 2009, and H.R. 2868, the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Act of 2009, we're considering today are not without controversy. And like every member on this committee, and certainly in the Congress, Homeland Security is a concern and a priority. And I'm aware that the manager's amendment makes some good changes to the bills, but I still have a number of concerns. There have been disagreements over how chemical facilities should be regulated to address security issues, but Congress was able to enact provisions to authorize the DHS to regulate security at designated chemical facilities. And rather than enact new legislation, we should give the DHS the opportunity to fully enact the laws that we've already passed. It is too soon, I think, for Congress to start over with new regulations. I support a 3-year extension of the existing law to give DHS time to finalize implementation of the security regs and allow Congress to determine what works and what doesn't, and I prefer that to what we're doing today. We must legislate from a body of experience and accumulated evidence, not ideological notions of what sounds like a good idea, especially when it means stranding billions of dollars of investments at a time when we have frozen domestic financing market and a struggling economy. And while I have serious concerns about the jobs impact from the legislation, the problems extend beyond the economic realm. The citizen law provisions in the Chemical Plant Security Bill, while toned down from the original text, are still inappropriate for national security legislation. Allowing these types of lawsuits could harm security at these facilities, not make it stronger. The citizen suit provisions in the bills are an example of why we should not be rushing, especially considering that terrorists hire lawyers and probably could use them. Citizen suits are not used in national defense context and should not be used here. People should not be able to compel the release of roadmaps to destruction by simply using the legal discovery process. In closing, my concerns about H.R. 2868 would increase costs, send jobs abroad without bolstering national security. Chemical manufacturers have already invested millions of dollars in chemical security upgrades to ensure that the communities where they operate are safe, efficient, and secure. The requirements in this bill will not necessarily improve chemical security. It will only shift the security risk to other sectors such as transportation or manufacturing while hindering the economic profitability in the process. Hundreds of thousands of jobs have been lost over the last year, resulting in plant closures and facilities operating on the margins. We've lost 1 in 5 manufacturing jobs just in the last 18 months. My state's unemployment is still at 15%. The chemical industry has been hard hit by economic recession, and now is not the time to jeopardize those jobs while weakening our own national security. We need a bill that secures the economy, not just re-engineers it and maybe even exports it. I yield back.
Great. The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the chairman emeritus of the full committee, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Dingle.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I have no opening statement.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Doyle. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington State, Mr. Inslee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to note, really appreciate moving this issue. We know we've got a problem with supply of radioactive medical isotopes. I just want to thank the Chair for including language that would make sure that we take into consideration the research reactors and their conversion process from highly enriched to low enriched uranium. That includes one at Washington State University, which of course I have an interest in, and I hope we can continue to work on that as the bill moves forward. Thank you.
Great. Chair, thank the gentleman's time has expired. The Chair recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton.
Good. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the ranking member, Mr. Upton, for these markups today. We appreciate regular order at the subcommittee. We hope this is something that becomes the practice and not the exception. I wish I could share the enthusiasm for the three bills that we're marking up today. I have no enthusiasm for the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Act. I think we're making a mistake. I think we're making significant changes to a chemical facility security program that's not been fully implemented yet. We should wait till it is implemented before we decide to change it. The chemical facility security program applies to a broad swath of the American economy, from hospitals to farms to factories and, of course, to chemical plants. We should at least identify and understand the problem we're trying to fix before we have a solution. We again seem to be approaching this from the perspective of crafting a solution that's in search of a problem. This is compounded by the fact that we're playing catch-up with another committee in this Congress, and in my opinion, a committee that we should have had primary jurisdiction instead of the Homeland Security Committee. It is true that the current law will soon expire. We should not use the sunset provision as an excuse to make radical changes to a program that the Department of Homeland Security is still working to finalize implementation, and there has not even been a compliance inspection yet under the current law. Mr. Chairman, unemployment is closing in on 10%. We all know that. There are many challenges affecting new project financing right now. I don't think it's appropriate to cavalierly make changes to chemical plant security laws that would chill future capital investments and strand previous industry capital investment. Our multinational companies may or may not care where they manufacture their chemicals, but to every American worker who works in one of these factories that's in the United States at this time, they do care. It's my opinion that if we implement this proposal and it becomes law, you're simply going to see chemical plant manufacturing in the United States cease to exist over the next 10 years. It concerns me that H.R. 2868 is way too broad in its application. Chemical facility security is not a branch of environmental law. We have numerous laws on environmental issues, and by and large our chemical plants are in compliance with those laws. Terrorism is not an environmental issue. Terrorism is just what it says it is, an act of war. It is the intentional infliction of death and destruction. If we're going to be effective on security, those security decisions should be based on efforts to protect first our human lives that work in these plants, and then the property and the equipment, the physical infrastructure of those plants. So I can't be supportive of 2868, Mr. Chairman. The bill, as it is before the subcommittee, would unquestionably impose new costs without increasing security at all. It's the product of a view that chemical facilities are a necessary evil instead of a national asset, and that they cannot be trusted to protect themselves from certain harm. This bill will result in an atmosphere where operators worry less about security, innovation, and job creation, and more about civil lawsuits, conflicting regulations, and things of this sort. On the Medical Isotope Production Act of 2009, the goal is to develop a domestic capacity to produce the medical isotopes molybdenum-99 or MO-99. I do have some concerns that the proposed 7 to 10 year timeline for bringing these facilities online may not be realistic given the significant challenges that building the facilities encompasses, such as technology availability, facility siting, regulatory approvals, and waste management. I have an amendment prepared to offer to give the Secretary of Energy the opportunity to extend this deadline. I'm aware there's some concerns about extending the deadline, and so I may or may not offer it depending on how that particular markup goes. On the other bill before us, I believe that we are supportive, and I don't believe that bill should be too controversial. With that, Mr. Chairman, I see my time's expired, and I yield back and look forward to the markup.
I thank the gentleman. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Hill. The gentleman waves. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gonzalez. The gentleman waves. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Matheson.
Mr. Chairman, just briefly, I had a conversation before the hearing on the water bill that we're considering today, which I don't think is particularly controversial. I look forward to working with the committee as we go to the full committee markup a little bit on the definition of what small water systems are. I've heard from a few rural water users who have expressed some questions that I think we can work out, and I look forward to working with you as you go to full committee. I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman very much, and we make our commitment to work out those issues. Let me turn and recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stearns.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a healthcare industry faces an aging population and the demand for diagnostic services continue to rise, the need for a consistent, reliable supply of Moly-99 has become increasingly important. And so passage of H.R. 3276 is necessary to address the current shortage of medical isotopes and reduce the proliferation of highly enriched uranium. As mentioned by the ranking member, I am concerned also about H.R. 2868 and H.R. 3259. Both of these bills would force more people, in my opinion, out of work by imposing needless and harmful regulations on the American industry, by making the production and storage of chemicals more expensive, burdensome, and subject to a patchwork of different and conflicting regulations with no apparent benefit to public safety or to national security. The proposed legislation goes beyond increasing security protections by simply imposing mandates on American manufacturers as to which products and processes they will use without any regard for practicality, availability, or more importantly, on cost. Absent federal preemption and a uniform national standard, this legislation, prescriptive states' rules, will result in a confusing patchwork of different and potentially contradictory regulations and divert scarce resources to comply with requirements that do not necessarily advance national security interests while creating more economic instability. A state-by-state regulatory structure will lead to uneven security efforts and result in confusion for the multitude of companies that operate in more than one state. Additionally, it contradicts the idea of having a national security plan developed through the Department of Homeland Security. To correct this problem, I will be introducing an amendment to both bills that strikes the state preemption provisions. I, along with undoubtedly every member of this subcommittee, believe that securing chemical and drinking water facilities against deliberate attack is crucial to protecting Americans, which is why since 2006, clear and comprehensive chemical security regulations have been in place at both chemical and drinking water facilities to secure everything from large chemical facilities to small university laboratories. The current chemical security regulations, which are enforced by the Department of Homeland Security, require facilities to address a wide range of threats, from preventing a bomb-laden car from reaching its intended target to preventing theft or diversion of materials from site. I, along with Mr. Shattuck, plan to introduce an amendment to simply extend the current regulatory framework by 3 years, allowing companies and the DHS time to implement the existing regulations before we change them. Removing the sunset date and making the current chemical security regulations permanent would provide the certainty needed to both protect citizens and support our nation's economic recovery. And with that, I yield back.
Great. We thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Barrow. The gentleman waives his opening, so we now turn and recognize the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Whitfield.
Like other members, I do have some concerns, particularly about the water bill and the chemical facility bill, but I just wanted to make one comment on the chemical facility bill. I noticed that the Homeland Security Appropriations Committee authorized authorized the DHS to establish risk-based security performance standards, and I, for one, continue to object to the Appropriations Committee taking action that takes authority away from the Committee of Jurisdiction. And I just want to make that comment, and then I'd waive the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not on the Homeland Security Committee, but maybe the chairman can request a secret briefing to highlight, since September 11, 2001, what attacks have been planned on facilities like these and which ones have been averted for us to really get a handle on the need. And so I would ask the chairman if he would consider doing that, because in my background, I have no information that says attacks have been planned, attacks have been averted, which speaks to this immediate need of this. So if the chairman would consider that, I'd be happy to attend that. I'll offer two amendments on H.R. 3258. One would be that if we're going to focus on national security and facilities, that there should be a national standard versus allowing the states then to tinker with that and make it more difficult, and then have it's the whole federal versus the federalist system versus the national system. And on Homeland Security, you should have a national standard. The other one would be part of this debate on inherent safer technologies, which is, again, I think code for making it more difficult for people who have done a current job, knowing the materials that they use and keeping their employees safe, forcing them not to do that. And again, the whole focus on this side will be how much more rules and regulations are we going to place on American workers that drive jobs overseas. It seems to be a continuing theme from this in this period of time, and we need to start having the debate on, first of all, whether there's a need, and that's why I call upon maybe a briefing on what has actually been stopped by our intelligence communities and targeted, and two, what kind of job losses will be occurred if we move in this direction. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Shattuck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Shimkus, for sliding over. Obviously, national security is extremely important to the American people, and I did serve briefly on the Homeland Security Committee. There should be no compromise with regard to achieving the greatest degree of national security we can, in fact, achieve. However, it is important that we not sacrifice technological innovation in the name of national security. It is important that we balance these. I am specifically concerned about the inherently safer technology provisions of H.R. 2868, the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Act. I believe we need to be cautious. It seems to me that this concept opens the door for government bureaucrats to step in and second-guess industry with regard to what is both inherently safer and what will work for innovation and technology. We face an economy that is in deep, deep, deep trouble. We have Americans without jobs. We have a jobless recovery. We have Americans at the highest level of unemployment in the history of this nation. And it seems to me that a command and control structure where bureaucrats are telling businesses that they can no longer innovate does not serve our nation or our national security. A bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. should not have the ability to force a plant or facility to use a process that is less efficient, assuming that the owners of that plant can prove that they can use the process they have in place in a safe manner. One of the things that I find troubling is that forever Washington is passing hard and fast laws and rules, and yet technology outstrips those. And I believe it is important to allow the private sector to determine the appropriate processes and technologies necessary to conduct their business. Science and technology always moves faster than bureaucratic government regulation. By forcing a refiner to switch, for example, from hydrofluoric acid to sulfuric acid, we may be limiting that industry from discovering an even safer and more efficient process. So I will join with Mr. Stearns in offering the amendment he proposes. Invariably, technology will move quicker than government intervention, and invariably, when the government intercedes and dictates not just that we must be safe, but how we must be safe, we put the economy at risk. In this government, we simply cannot afford to do that. It is vitally important that we keep a vibrant economy and our national security, and it is the job of this government to do both and not to burden industry by imposing government solutions which are unworkable, inefficient, and not necessarily any more safe. With that, I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Pitts.
Submit my opening statement for the record.
So ordered, without objection. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for bringing these bills before the committee. And I look forward to the consideration of these important pieces of legislation. However, I am particularly concerned with H.R. 2868, the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Act of 2009. We all agree that the protection of our nation's chemical facilities is vitally important to the safety and security of our nation. These particular facilities are high-interest targets for terrorists seeking to do our nation harm. In 2007, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security issued the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards to ensure the protection of these at-risk facilities. Today, we are examining legislation to add additional reforms that may negatively impact many companies, including several in my district. I have significant apprehension about the implementation of any new program, considering the existing program has not been fully implemented. More specifically, the preemption provisions, the potential for citizen suits, and mandating inherently safer technologies are a particular concern to the future growth of our nation's chemical industry and global economic competitiveness. I am also worried about the cost to companies affected by these proposed changes. The costs of switching to inherently safer technologies will increase the operating costs of these businesses, leading to a loss of jobs in the long run. While we continue to fight back from a severe economic recession, I cannot support any legislation that eliminates more jobs through an increase in unnecessary government regulations. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to waive my opening statement.
So ordered. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to be here to mark up the three bills, one of which is relatively non-controversial and two of which I suspect will highlight some of the policy beliefs that differentiate both sides of the dais in this committee. I want to be very clear. I don't believe there is a single member of this subcommittee who does not want the strictest security measures to be in place at our nation's chemical and drinking water facilities. The potential for attack at these locations is great, and the need for them to be secure to protect the surrounding communities is without doubt. However, moving forward and expanding the federal government's role in regulating these facilities without first allowing existing regulations to be fully implemented is, in my opinion, imprudent and unwise. H.R. 3276, the American Medical Isotopes Production Act. Technetium-99, the decay product of molybdenum-99, is used in approximately two-thirds of all diagnostic medical isotope procedures in the United States, procedures which detect cancer, kidney and heart disease, and many other medical conditions. This year, the National Academy of Sciences recommended that Moly-99 no longer be produced from highly enriched uranium, but instead from low-enriched uranium, thus reducing the potential that this highly enriched uranium could be used for nuclear weaponry. H.R. 3276 authorizes the Department of Energy to support efforts to produce molybdenum-99 domestically without using highly enriched uranium. Further, the bill prohibits the export of highly enriched uranium 7 years after its enactment, with the manager's amendment granting an additional 4 years if the Secretary of Energy deems that this is necessary. I think the bill was carefully crafted and meets the right balance for protecting the world from nuclear proliferation, while ensuring that these critical medical isotopes are continually available for life-saving tests. I'm grateful to the majority for its work on the first bill, and I stand with my colleagues on this side of the aisle on questioning whether the following two bills are prudent at this time. Imposing onerous regulations on facilities which are still in the process of implementing Congress's last round of regulations appears ill-advised at this time. I believe that H.R. 3258, the Drinking Water System Security Act, and H.R. 2868, the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Act, both require more investigation as the Department of Homeland Security finalizes its reports from the implementation on the last set of chemical facility regulations. The consideration of these bills should be postponed until the committee can review those reports. Congress last addressed the issue of chemical facility security in fiscal year 07 in the Homeland Security Appropriations Bill. The regulations put in place the following enactment of this legislation and are in the process of being fully implemented, and Department of Homeland Security has yet to make any on-site assignments regarding the covered facilities' compliance with the previous regulations. A prudent course of action, if indeed any further regulations are necessary, would be to wait until Department of Homeland Security has had an opportunity to report back to Congress on the success of current regulations. Similar concerns exist for the chemical manufacturing plants. In the interest of time, I will submit the balance of my statement for the record. But if this subcommittee is serious about securing facilities rather than just simply regulating them, then much more dialogue needs to occur as to the best possible way to go about achieving that desirable goal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back the balance of my time and submit my statement for the record.
Thank you. We thank the gentleman. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have serious concerns with the Chemical Facility Regulation Bill before the committee today. Security and safety always need to be a top priority for employers in all businesses. And while we're focused on safety, we need to also make sure radical environmentalists like those behind the cap-and-trade energy tax are not able to dictate policies that will be harmful to our economy and ship jobs overseas to countries like China and India. Louisiana is home to 61 chemical manufacturing companies operating at 96 different sites, and there is no doubt that this bill would shutter many of our large employers simply because the cost of complying with these new radical environmental policies will be too much to sustain. This bill isn't about increasing safety at chemical plants. It's about imposing radical environmental mandates on American companies. And make no mistake, this bill will result in the loss of thousands more American jobs that will be shipped overseas to foreign countries at a time when we should be trying to create more jobs instead of destroying our nation's manufacturing base. This bill will also lead to an increased number of civil lawsuits against companies operating in the United States. Also, I have serious concerns about the people who currently now run FEMA being placed in charge of running manufacturing plants when they themselves admit they don't have the technical expertise to be making these kinds of decisions that are outlined in H.R. 2868. We need to defeat dangerous legislation like H.R. 2868 and the cap-and-trade energy tax that will impose radical environmental policies and put millions more Americans out of work at a time when we should be focused on creating jobs. And I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you for holding today's markup on three critical pieces of legislation to help protect chemical facilities and drinking water systems across the country, as well as to enhance domestic medical isotope production. It would be an understatement to say H.R. 2868, the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Act, would have a tremendous impact on our congressional district. The Houston Ship Channel I represent is home to the largest petrochemical complex in the country. These chemical facilities contribute much to our economy and way of life and employ thousands of workers in high-paying quality jobs. These dedicated employees, as well as the communities that surround these facilities, deserve the best security standards possible to prevent another unthinkable act of terrorism on U.S. soil. As introduced, I had several concerns with H.R. 2868 that I hope will be addressed in today's markup. First, granting the DHS Secretary authority to mandate a facility to perform a method to reduce consequences of terrorist attack must include a fair and transparent technical appeals process that requires DHS to examine such decisions with facility representatives as well as with experts knowledgeable in the fields of process safety, engineering, and chemistry. Second, the personnel surety requirements under H.R. 2868 should not be duplicative with comparable existing regulations for chemical facilities already regulated under the Maritime Transportation Security Act. Third, workers must be afforded a robust redress process due to security background check provisions in the bill, including a process for DHS to make a determination on whether the worker poses a terrorist security risk according to the CFAX regulations under this bill. And finally, any civil pursuit provisions must permit affected citizens the ability to compel agency action on CFAS and provide an avenue for citizens to report facilities in potential violation of the bill's requirement. H.R. 2868 is far from perfect, but I appreciate both Chairman Markey and Chairman Waxman and their staff for addressing several of the concerns that included in the manager's amendment today. Specifically, worked with the chairman on language to ensure MTSA facilities would not have to perform additional background security requirements under CFATS, identify the TWIC credential as being able to satisfy the CFATS requirement in the bill, and clarify that the Coast Guard will be the main entity enforcing the requirements of this Act for MTSA facilities, and also provide a explicit consultative role for the Coast Guard if the DHS Secretary considers mandating IST on an MTSA facility, require quantitative reports on the number of workers undergoing background checks, and ensure DHS has the appropriate staffing capabilities to provide the site inspections as called for in the bill. I'd like to particularly thank the American Chemistry Council for attempting to reach a compromise on several of the most contentious pieces of this legislation, which will also be addressed in the manager's amendment. I want to thank both chairmen for working with me to create an appeals process in H.R. 3258, the Drinking Water System Security Act. This will ensure a fair and open hearing on any IST decisions made by the state or the EPA. Finally, H.R. 3276, the American Medical Isotope Production Act, will give the Department of Energy the authority and the resources to quickly assist the private sector in producing a domestic supply of molybdenum-99 within the use of highly enriched uranium. Technetium-99 is processed and used in 85% of all body scans to track and detect cancer, heart disease, or kidney illness. Unfortunately, molybdenum cannot be stockpiled. It's a K product. And Technetium-99 has a shelf life of 6 hours, making it impossible to import it from long distances. Delays in medical treatment because of shortage of these must be addressed, and H.R. 3276 does that. And, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I yield back my time.
Great. Gentleman's time has expired. The chair does not see any other members seeking recognition for the purpose of making an opening statement. So we will conclude that portion of the hearing, and the chair now calls up H.R. 3258, and the clerk will report the title. 3276, I'm sorry, 3276.
H.R. 3276, a bill to promote the production of poly 99 in the United States for medical isotope production, and to and the condition and phase out the sort of highly enriched uranium for the production of medical isotopes.
Without objection, the bill will be considered as read. Without objection, the bill will be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. The chair will now recognize himself to offer a manager's amendment to H.R. 3276 in the form of an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3276 offered by Mr. Markey of Massachusetts.
Without objection, the manager's amendment will be considered as read. Hearing no objection, the chair will now recognize himself for a statement on the amendment. I am pleased to have been joined with the ranking member on the subcommittee, Mr. Upton, to introduce H.R. 3276, the American Medical Isotopes Production Act. The bipartisan bill will safeguard America's health care and our national security by helping to establish production of critical medical isotopes here at home. H.R. 3276 will end our dependence on aging nuclear reactors outside of our borders for these life-saving pharmaceuticals. And by ending the export of weapons-grade, highly enriched uranium for medical isotope production, H.R. 3276 will accelerate U.S. efforts to convert all foreign reactors away from the use of bomb-quality material. The nuclear nonproliferation element of this bill is significant and it is timely. In the 1950s and 60s, as part of the Atoms for Peace program, the United States exported nuclear reactors and bomb-grade fuel around the globe as part of our diplomatic strategy. We now have active programs to gather that dangerous material back up again. However, there was a vestige of the program that deals with this medical isotope issue that we are trying to deal with. Fortunately, medical isotopes can be produced without the use of bomb-grade material. Earlier this year, the National Academy of Sciences concluded that there is no technical or economic reason why all medical isotope production facilities around the world cannot be converted to the use of low-enriched uranium. Earlier this year, the negotiation over Iran's nuclear program focused a spotlight on the link between medical isotope production and nuclear nonproliferation and the critical importance of converting reactors from high-enriched to low-enriched uranium. Iran produces medical isotopes in a small reactor which runs on low-enriched fuel. This reactor will run out of fuel by the end of 2010. On October 2nd, negotiators agreed in principle to take 80% of Iran's stockpile of low-enriched uranium to Russia and France to be turned into fuel for this reactor. This agreement would dramatically reduce the amount of uranium in Iran available for possible weapons use. At its current rate of enrichment, it would take Iran 2 years to build its stockpile back up to the current size. However, not only was Iranian reactor actually built over 40 years ago by the United States, it was actually originally fueled by weapons-grade uranium. In the late 1980s, the reactor was converted to low-enriched uranium by Argentina. Converting reactors away from the use of highly enriched uranium, both at home and abroad, is very much in our national security because it will send a signal that the United States will no longer export this dangerous material. This legislation will accelerate U.S. efforts to convert reactors around the world. In fact, this has already begun, as the Department of Energy testified last month, that all the medical isotope production reactors around the world which still use high-enriched uranium have approached the Department of Energy for assistance in conversion in just the last few months. So today I am offering this amendment on behalf of myself and Congressman Upton, a manager's amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3276. We have worked together on a bipartisan basis to address issues raised by members on both sides of the aisle on this amendment. So the amendment will add findings regarding other medical isotopes and the success of DOE's domestic reactor conversion program, expand the scope of the report required by the national academies to include other medical isotopes, clarify the high-enriched uranium export provision, lengthen the time period for the end of the high-enriched uranium export from 7 to 10 years to 7 to 11 years, require highly enriched uranium-fueled reactors which are seeking funds under this bill to report to the Department of Energy on the status of their conversion to low-enriched uranium, and make several technical corrections. The amendment reflects the hard work of many of the members on our subcommittee I would like to thank Mr. Upton and Mr. Inslee, Ms. Baldwin, and many others for their excellent work on these strengthening provisions. Now let me turn and recognize the gentleman from Michigan, the ranking member, Mr. Upton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I again want to thank you for bringing this bill to our attention. I believe that it was last summer when we first started talking about the dilemma of the shortage of this material and the need for Congress to take action. I support this manager's amendment. I appreciate the work that our staffs have done working together from start to finish on this issue. I would say that I'm not aware of amendments on our side, and from our side I think we're ready and willing to let this bill move very quickly through the process. I appreciate again your willingness to be a good listener, and this really does fix a problem that will be very widespread in this country if Congress does not take action. So I would yield back my time at this point.
Great. We thank the gentleman. Are other members seeking recognition for the purpose of speaking on the medical isotope bill?
Mr. Chairman.
The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton.
I have a parliamentary inquiry. Is the manager's amendment open to amendment yet?
It will be open to amendment, okay. Yes.
I have an amendment when it is open to amendment.
Okay. We're just finishing, statements, and then I will seek recognition of members who wish to make amendments. I see no other members seeking recognition. Does any member seek recognition to offer an amendment to the manager's amendment? The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk that I'm going to offer and enter into a colloquy or a dialogue with you and Mr. Upton, and then based on how that dialogue goes, I may offer or withdraw the amendment.
Okay, the clerk
but
will...
I do have an amendment at the desk. It's Barton 028.
The clerk will report the amendment.
We have 3 amendments, Mr. Chairman.
Barton 028.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Mr. Barton. Page 8, line 11, strike for no more than.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that the amendment be considered as read. We'll let her read while the chairman's reading. It's not a long amendment, so.
Page 8, line 24 through page 9, line 31, amend subsection D, insert to read as follows. D, if after 11 years the Secretary determines that imposition of the export ban will result in the critical ages in supports of Molly 99 available to meet U.S. medical needs, the export ban shall not go into effect and shall be suspended until such time as the Secretary determines that there are adequate global supplies available to meet U.S. domestic needs.
We thank the clerk. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I think everybody on the subcommittee knows that we're not exporting these isotopes right now. So to impose an export ban is kind of an empty gesture. But the reactor that we've been getting most of our isotopes from in Canada is currently, I think as you and Mr. Upton know, shut down. And so we're getting our isotopes, I believe, from Europe. So what we're trying to do is to develop a domestic industry that doesn't use the highly enriched uranium, and I support that, and I think all the subcommittee members support that. The bill before us, Mr. Chairman, as you and Mr. Upton know, at the end of this 11 years, in order, if in fact our domestic industry is not ready to produce the isotopes, it takes a joint resolution of the House and the Senate before the Secretary of Energy can waive the ban. So what this amendment does is it strikes that joint resolution and simply gives the Secretary the flexibility to prevent the ban from going into effect. I think it's common sense, and so the argument against it appears to be that if we don't have a tougher export ban deadline, that the industry may not get the financing to develop the domestic industry. So I would like to hear what you and Mr. Upton say about this amendment and why it seems to be not worthy of inclusion, because it does make the bill more flexible. So I would yield to either you or Mr. Upton.
Good, thank you. Yeah, I thank the gentleman, and the amendment here would actually cut Congress and the committee out of the process, and after 11 years provided for in this bill for the export ban to take effect, neither of the two major foreign highly enriched uranium reactors will be well over 60 years old and are not scheduled even to be operational. So the HEU ban in this bill was drafted according to the recommendations of the National Academy of Sciences. It's supported by all industry players, including the major industry association, CORA, the Council on Radiopharmaceuticals and Radioisotopes. So they support the bill as it is drafted, the industry.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm not opposing the time limit. I'm trying to give some flexibility at the end if we're not ready to go. And that's what I want to hear from you and Mr. Upton is
the Department of Energy, if the gentleman would, the Department of Energy testified that within 5 years we will be able to produce all of our needs here domestically. That's 5 years, and that 11 years is more than enough time in order to accomplish that goal. But they did testify that the goal could be accomplished within 5 years. So we think in extending it out even from 10 out to 11 years, which we've done here as part of the negotiation, that we really have created an enormous window for the completion of the project. And again, the industry says that it can be done in that period of time as well. So we have the Department of Energy and the industry agreeing, kind of on a 5-year period, with 11 years as being,
well,
more than enough time in order to accomplish the goal.
And I might say that if the gentleman will yield, I'd be glad between when we go between for full committee, if there's some compelling reason that we ought to look at this to work with Mr. Markey and Mr. Wexman and Mr. Barton to see if in fact we need to address this and
well,
put it
I withdraw it. I just want the assurance that 11 or 12 years from now, if either of you gentlemen are Speaker of the House and bad things happen and we don't get it done, that y'all will make a personal commitment to introduce this joint resolution, and then whoever the majority leader in the Senate is, the President, that we all work together to have a kumbaya moment to make this joint resolution happen. Because, I can name a number of bills that we've passed in this committee with full jurisdiction that had these deadlines in them. Pulling one out of the hat, the Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982, here's 2009, and it has yet to be implemented. So excuse me if I'm a little skeptical of the best of intentions, but I have ultimate faith in my two leaders of this subcommittee. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will withdraw the amendment.
I thank the gentleman. And I give the gentleman's commitment because there is no known instance of an Irishman from Boston voluntarily leaving Congress. So I'll be here, and so I can make a commitment for myself. I don't know about Mr. Upton, but I'll be here.
I withdraw the amendment, Mr.
Chairman.
Chairman.
Thank the gentleman very much. Without objection, so ordered. Are there any other amendments that want to be proffered at this time by any other members of the committee? If not, there being no further discussion at this time, then the question then comes on the manager's amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. So I now move that the Subcommittee on Energy and Environment forward H.R. 3276 to the full committee with the recommendations that the bill passed. All those in favor will say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill, H.R. 3276, is favorably forwarded to the full committee as amended. And all members will have the requisite time to add their comments to the debate at the appropriate point. So we'll just take a brief 1-minute recess at this point. Okay, great. The subcommittee will come back to order, and the chair now calls up H.R. 3258. The clerk will report the title.
H.R. 3258, a bill to amend the Safe Drinking Water Act to enhance the security of the public water systems of the United States.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill will be dispensed with. Hearing no objection, that will be so ordered. The chair. Okay, and the bill is now amendment to. The bill is now open to amendment at any point. The chair will now recognize himself to offer a manager's amendment to H.R. 3258. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 3258 offered by Mr. Markey. Page 7, line 10, insert, including...
Without objection, the manager's amendment will be considered as read, and I will be allowed to explain the amendment to the members of the committee. Without objection, so ordered. The chair now recognizes himself. Without objection, the Drinking Water System Security Act of 2009 closes the critical security gap at drinking water facilities by providing the Environmental Protection Agency with enhanced authority to ensure the security of drinking water facilities in recognition of the unique public health role these facilities play in providing a safe supply of drinking water. The Drinking Water System Security Act of 2009, which is exclusively within the jurisdiction of the Energy and Commerce Committee, has the support of the environmental and labor communities and also the American Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies. In addition to technical and more modest changes, the Manager's Amendment contains several important changes. It ensures that facilities that are told by the EPA or state regulators that they must implement safer technologies or processes are entitled to an appeal of that decision. This language is supported by the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies and by the American Water Works Association. In recognition of the fact that many of the lower risk, smaller water systems that might be subject to the inherently safer technology assessment requirements have limited resources, the Manager's Amendment directs EPA to provide guidance, computer software, and other tools to these systems to assist them with compliance. And finally, the Act authorizes $315 million in 2011, in part for providing funding to water systems to assist them with compliance, including performing inherently safer technology assessments and making necessary upgrades. EPA is directed to prioritize water systems that have the greatest need for the funds, as well as those that pose the greatest security risk, as it determines how to allocate the money. We have also included language suggested by the minority that ensures that these funds are not used for personnel costs or other day-to-day operating expenses at drinking water facilities. With that summary, I yield back the balance of my time. I urge members to cast an aye vote on the Manager's Amendment, and I'll turn to recognize the ranking member of the committee, Mr. Upton, for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I understand, we have a number of amendments that we're going to offer on our side to both this bill and the next bill. And I'm not exactly sure how they're drafted, whether they're drafted to your Manager's Amendment or whether they're drafted to the entire bill. There may be a difference between the two. I might ask unanimous consent that our amendments can be offered to either one. And I know that
without objection, any of the amendments of the minority drafted to the underlying bill will be considered to conform with the bill as amended by the Manager's Amendment. So, without objection, so ordered.
I might suggest that since you have the votes, that you might move your Manager's Amendment, and that point will then open the bill up to amendment, and I think Mr. Barton is going to go first.
Okay, great. So
I can count. So it's
okay. So without objection, the vote comes on the Manager's Amendment. All in favor signify by the sign of aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. No. The ayes have it. The Manager's Amendment is adopted. There are members now seeking recognition for amendments to the Manager's Amendment. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The bill before us changes the standard for culpability from the current standard of knowingly or recklessly publishing, disclosing, or making known protected information to purposefully publishing, disclosing, or making known protected information. The minority staff has not been able to find any instance in current law of such a standard, that is, a standard of purposefully. In the Public Health, Security, and Bioterrorism Preparedness and Response Act of 2002, which passed this subcommittee and full committee, we use the standard knowingly or recklessly. What we're doing here, if we go forward with changing the standard.
Would the gentleman suspend briefly? Sure. And I would ask the clerk to please.
Oh, yeah, I do have an amendment at the desk. Yeah,
please
that's right.
Please distribute.
I should know better.
Please distribute.
I
without
apologize.
objection.
Amendment offered by Mr. Barton in subparagraph B of Section 1433(1) of the Safe Drinking Water Act, as amended by Section 2 of the bill, strike purposefully and insert
Without objection,
knowingly or
the amendment will
recklessly.
be considered as read. The clerk will distribute the amendment, and the gentleman from
It's right here.
Texas will be recognized once again to explain his amendment.
Well, I had already gotten about halfway through my explanation, and I do apologize. I've only been on the committee 24 years, so I guess I'm still a little green at how to offer amendments. I should know to have it offered before I start talking about it. But back to the substance, both this bill and the chemical security bill that's right after this does change the standard for culpability from knowingly or recklessly to some amorphous standard that's not in law of purposefully. We believe that if you go to the newer standard of purposefully, it would make it more difficult to prosecute employees who do disclose the information that we're attempting to protect. And keep in mind, this sensitive information has to be provided to federal officials about the vulnerabilities of these facilities. So what you're doing, if you change the standard from knowingly or recklessly to purposefully, you're saying that if an employee acts in complicity with a terrorist organization to provide this type of very sensitive information, you're giving them a roadmap to how to destroy the lives and property of the very facilities that we're trying to protect, and yet we're going to make it more difficult to prosecute that individual. That, to me, Mr. Chairman, just seems ludicrous and totally uncalled for. So all this amendment does, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, is maintain the current standard for prosecution as it is in current law, which is knowingly and recklessly, and would not weaken for prosecution purposes by going to an unknown standard of purposefully. So I would hope that regardless of how we feel about the merits of the overall bill, we can all agree on a bipartisan basis to maintain current law on standard for prosecution, which is what this amendment does. With that, I yield back.
Okay, the gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And, of course, I'm going to speak in opposition to my fellow Texans' amendment, and let me explain why. First of all, I believe that our understanding on this side of the aisle is that purposefully would be when it's the conscious objective of the actor is to engage in unlawful conduct. So the example as presented by the ranking member would be adequately addressed, more than fully adequately addressed, in the language that we propose. The reason our language is more flexible is that it would allow legitimate individuals that have certain concerns to share the information which is so vital to first responders. If you look at the language in the bill, it anticipates that the administrator or the secretary is going to promulgate certain rules to protect the information, but to facilitate the exchange of the information, which goes to the most important aspect of having the information shared by the appropriate parties. To have the knowingly or recklessly standard exposes individuals that would have no intent of violating any of those procedures subject themselves to a federal criminal charge, where a year in jail and a fine of up to $100,000. I could give you an example that someone proposed today or brought up in a conversation. It could be someone in the facility who believes they are corresponding or communicating with the fire chief. Now, that particular fire chief has been replaced, but the information nevertheless goes to the wrong person. That person, again, relying on what they thought was current information and in good faith, provides information would then be subject to a criminal penalty. So we are not going to weaken any of the safeguards we have that obviously would protect us from those that would wish us harm by divulging this information to the wrong party. So I believe that Mr. Barton's apprehension, while it is well-intentioned and in good faith, obviously offered in good faith, would not result in the situation that he described. And I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. Are there other members seeking recognition to speak on the Barton amendment? The chair sees none, so the vote then comes on the Barton amendment. All those in favor signify by the sign of aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Nay. The noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like a roll call vote.
The gentleman from Texas requests a roll call. The chair will, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Markey.
Votes no.
Mr. Markey votes no. Mr. Doyle. Mr. Inslee. Mr. Inslee, no. Mr. Butterfield. Mr. Butterfield, no. Mr. Melanson. Ms. Melanson votes no. Mr. Hill. Mr. Hill, no. Ms. Matsui. Ms. Matsui votes no. Mr. McNerney. Mr. McNerney, no. Mr. Welch. Mr. Dingle. No. Mr. Dingle votes no. Mr. Boucher. Mr. Pallone. Mr. Engel. Mr. Engel votes no. Mr. Green. No. Mr. Green votes no. Mrs. Capps.
This is amazing.
Ms. Harmon. Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Gonzalez votes no. Ms. Baldwin. Ms. Baldwin votes no. Mr. Ross. Mr. Matheson. Mr. Matheson, no. Mr. Barrow.
Are we winning?
Mr. Barrow votes aye.
Do we have the
Mr. Waxman. Mr. Waxman votes no. Mr. Upton. Mr. Upton votes aye. Mr. Hall. Mr. Hall votes aye. Mr. Stearns. Mr. Stearns, aye. Mr. Whitfield. Mr. Whitfield votes aye. Mr. Shimkus. Mr. Shimkus, aye. Mr. Shattuck. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Pitts. Mr. Pitts votes aye. Ms. Bonomack. Ms. Bonomack, aye. Mr. Walden. Mr. Walden votes aye. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Scalise. Mr. Scalise votes aye. Mr. Barton. Mr. Barton votes aye. Mr. Ross. Mr. Ross votes no. Mr. Boucher. Mr. Boucher votes no. Mrs. Capps. Mrs. Capps votes no. Mrs. Harmon. Ms. Harmon votes no. Mr. Pallone. Mr. Pallone votes no. Over here.
The clerk will report the vote.
On that vote, Mr. Chairman, the ayes were 12 and the nays were 19.
Okay. The amendment was defeated. Are there other members seeking recognition for the purpose of making amendments? Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 3258 offered by Mr. Pallone of New Jersey. At the end of subsection K of Section 1433 of the Safe Drinking Water Act, as amended by Section 2 of the bill, add the following. 3. Confidential communication of information aiding inspections. The administrator or a duly designated representative of the administrator.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read, and the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone, will be recognized for the purpose of explaining his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment is a simple one. It would codify that an employee or recognized employee bargaining agent shall be given the opportunity to participate in the physical inspection of a facility covered under this Act for the purpose of aiding the inspection and pointing out additional security issues from a worker's perspective. And this is especially important because employees of a facility that has a potential terrorist target will be hurt first and worse in the case of an attack. If employees' rights during an inspection are not written into law, employees might not be notified of an inspection or offered a meaningful chance to participate. Employees and their representatives routinely participate in OSHA inspections where their legal rights are explicit, but almost never participate in EPA inspections where there are no employee rights under many EPA statutes. If employees are excluded from inspections, vulnerabilities could be missed with catastrophic consequences. Now, oftentimes, non-supervisory employees have a unique perspective on safety issues that facility management can overlook. In New Jersey, because employees and union representatives are involved in the New Jersey Clean Air Act inspections conducted by the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, a number of important changes have been made. For example, management installed an alarm outside the control room at a facility after an inspection showed that an operator had to leave the control room to collect samples. And during that time, the operator was unable to hear the control room's toxic leak alarm. The change was made at the recommendation of the union representative. I appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Chairman, to offer this amendment to this legislation, and I would ask that we adopt it. With increased input from workers, it's my hope that we can further increase security at our nation's drinking water facilities and also for the next bill on chemical facilities. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. Are there members seeking recognition? The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for the council.
The gentleman is recognized for that purpose.
Yeah, this is not an exact analogy, but it's close. So, the current subcommittee chairman, at some point in the past, presented himself at a liquefied natural gas facility either in or near his district to try to surprise the security the security guards to see how prepared they were. Now, he wasn't presenting himself for an inspection. He was presenting himself to see if the security system was adequate. But if Mr. Markey or myself took it upon ourselves to instigate a surprise inspection of a chemical plant to see how prepared they were to protect themselves against terrorism, under Mr. Pallone's amendment, would the collective bargaining representative of the workers have to be notified in advance of that, and would they be allowed to participate in that sort of an inspection?
Reading from the text of the amendment, in line 11, it says, where there is a recognized bargaining agent described in subsection F3B, an employee representative shall be given an opportunity to accompany the administrator or the duly designated representative of the administrator during the physical inspection of any covered water system for the purpose of aiding such inspection, if representatives of the covered water system will also be accompanying the administrator or the duly designated representative of the administrator. So this says that if there is a visit by the administrator or a duly designated representative and representatives of the covered water system will be accompanying, then
So
in
the
those
answer is
situations,
yes. We have these inspections to try to make sure that the system is not vulnerable to terrorism, but now we're going to have to notify in advance the collective bargaining representative so that they can participate in the inspection, so all element of surprise to determine if it's vulnerable or not is going to be lost. So I would oppose the.
Mr. Barton, if I could ask you to yield.
I'd be happy to yield.
I mean, I think it says here in the amendment, shall be given an opportunity. I mean, I think that if there may be certain circumstances where that, opportunity is limited because of the circumstances. So I don't think we should read into it that it's an absolute. Maybe cases where there's not enough time for the covered water system or the representative of the bargaining unit to go.
Well, if I could, I don't know if I have the time, but if I have the time, I'm not opposed to workers, whether they're unionized or non-unionized, to go around when you're doing inspection to see what the vulnerabilities are, because I agree that the people that work in the plant are going to have a better idea sometimes about where the vulnerabilities are. I'm fine with that. What I'm not fine with is setting up a situation where you do these surprise inspections to see how the because this is about security against terrorism, that we now have to notify the collective bargaining representative, because that defeats the entire purpose of doing the inspection to see if the security systems are in place.
If the gentleman would yield, I mean, my understanding and what I'm trying to accomplish here is that that representative has the equal opportunity as the representative of the water system. There may very well be times when, you can't do either one because of the exigencies that you're mentioning. All we're trying to do here, and I think that's the way it reads, is that that opportunity is equal for the two, because we realize that those representatives sometimes can be very helpful. I don't want to read more into it than that.
Well, if we could, I know y'all got the votes for whatever you want to do today, but I would hope if you don't withdraw it, that we could clarify it. If the author agrees with what I said, when we do these inspections where they test the security of the facility, nobody at that facility should be made aware that that inspection is going to occur. It should just happen.
Well, I guess if the gentleman would yield, that's what my point is, that if the secretary or the administrator can just still do this on their own and not notify anybody. All we're saying here is that if the water systems representative, then the union representative or the, agent should be represented. But there's nothing to preclude the secretary from just doing a surprise inspection, not notifying anybody. I think it's clear that the way it reads. So
Well, my understanding is your amendment uses the word shall, not may.
Well, it says shall be given an opportunity if representatives of the covered water system will also be accompanying the administrator's representatives. So if the administrator decides to not notify anybody, then they don't have to have either one.
Well, I don't want to belabor the point. We've got a lot of other amendments, but we're setting up a system. The ostensible purpose of both this bill and the chemical plant security bill is to make our facilities more impervious to terrorism. Now, we've just weakened the standard for prosecution so that you can basically give information away unless you prove that your purpose was to blow it up. Then you can't be prosecuted. And now we're coming and saying that the workers in the plant, if they're represented by a collective bargaining unit, have the right to be notified of any inspection that's going to occur. I mean, it just seems to me we're taking the nameplate of the bills and going exactly the opposite way, and what we're doing in the actual text of the of the bill.
If the gentleman feels, I don't think it mandates notification. It says
shall is shall.
Shall be given an opportunity if the representative of the covered water system is also accompanying the designate of the administrator. But if the administrator decides to do a surprise inspection, they don't have to notify anybody.
Well, everywhere you've got an option that says shall. So, but I've made my point, and I would hope that we would oppose the until we can make some of these changes, which we've talked about, that we would oppose this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me ask questions of the council.
Great. The gentleman's time has expired. Are there other members seeking recognition
Mr.
on
Chairman.
the Pallone Amendment? The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to my friend from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone, what if the water system is not bargained or is a municipal system that have no bargain employees? Are we then saying that our desire is not to have a regular rank-and-file worker follow along the inspections and only those workers who are in bargaining units? In line 11, it says where there is a recognized bargaining agent described. The question is, there's probably a lot of facilities that aren't bargained.
The way it reads, employees would have the opportunity to communicate information, but the actual accompanying of the administrator is only required for an employee representative of a bargaining unit, and again, assuming that someone from the system is also accompanying the administrator. So from what I can see, it's the actual visit that is required of the representative of the bargaining unit.
So you agree with me that, I mean, that we're not talking, you know, my issue is many facilities, I think, in this country are not bargained. So in those facilities, we're not going to encourage rank-and-file employees, whether they be city employees, county employees, to follow along. Maybe a better way would say is the foreman or something versus just limiting it to bargaining unit elements.
If the way it reads, everyone is encouraged in the first part, you know, from lines 2 to 10, regardless of whether they represented a bargaining unit, to get involved in communicating information relevant to the compliance or noncompliance. But there's only a requirement for the visit where there's a recognized bargaining agency.
And then my question would be why? Why just bargaining unit? Why not encourage an employee, whether it's the foreman, why don't we designate by title, or the operating manager that day, versus why, again, there's so many facilities that aren't bargained.
Well, again,
some of them could be municipalities or rural water districts that aren't bargained.
Well, again, if you look at the first part of it,
I'm looking at where it says on line 11, where there is a recognized bargaining agent described in subsection F3B. I'm asking, why are we eliminating many water systems and the employees
from this
requirement or this opportunity to follow along in the inspection?
We're not eliminating them. We're just saying that it has to be done if there's a recognized bargaining agent. We're encouraging it to be done in all other circumstances as well. But
well, why don't we say it has to be done in all cases?
You could if you want to, but I think that in this that is just going to be more burdensome if that's what you want to do. But I mean, right now,
and this is not burdensome already, so it's more burdensome for facilities that aren't bargained, but not burdensome for facilities that are bargained.
Look, what I'm trying to say, and I don't want to keep repeating, we're encouraging non-supervisor employees.
Well, let's do that then. Let's encourage non-supervisory employees.
Well, you already do.
Well, only to bargained agents.
No. Administration shall offer non-supervisory employees the opportunity confidentially to communicate information relevant to the employer's compliance or noncompliance. Where there is a recognized bargaining unit, then there's an opportunity to accompany the administrator, if the representatives of the covered water system will also be accompanying the administrator or the representative. So it's just that distinction for the purposes of the visit.
I would say what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If you're going to have, it's good for bargaining unit workers to follow through in this inspection, we ought to encourage those facilities that aren't bargained to have an employee follow the inspection. If this isn't changed, I would encourage a no vote, and I yield back my time.
Great. Great. Gentleman's time has expired. Are there other members seeking recognition on the Pallone amendment? Chair sees no members seeking recognition, so the vote comes on the Pallone amendment. All those in favor signify by the sign of aye. All those nay. The ayes have it.
Roll call vote, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Illinois requests a roll call. The clerk will read the roll.
Mr. Markey.
Votes aye.
Mr. Markey votes aye. Mr. Doyle. Mr. Inslee. Mr. Inslee votes aye. Mr. Butterfield. Mr. Butterfield, aye. Mr. Melanson. Mr. Hill. Mr. Hill votes aye. Ms. Matsui. Ms. Matsui, aye. Mr. McNerney. Mr. McNerney, aye. Mr. Welch. Mr. Welch, aye. Mr. Dingle. Mr. Boucher. Mr. Pallone. Mr. Pallone votes aye. Mr. Engel. Mr. Engel votes aye. Mr. Green. Mr. Green, aye. Ms. Capps. Ms. Capps, aye. Ms. Harmon. Ms. Harmon, aye. Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Gonzalez, aye. Ms. Baldwin. Ms. Baldwin, aye. Mr. Ross. Mr. Ross, aye. Mr. Matheson. Mr. Barrow. Mr. Barrow votes aye. Mr. Waxman. Mr. Upton. Mr. Upton, no. Mr. Hall. Mr. Hall, no. Mr. Stearns. Mr. Stearns, no. Mr. Whitfield. Mr. Whitfield, no. Mr. Shimkus. Mr. Shimkus, no. Mr. Shattuck. Mr. Shattuck, no. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Pitts. Mr. Pitts, no. Ms. Bonomack. Ms. Bonomack, no. Mr. Walden. Mr. Walden, no. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Scalise. Mr. Scalise, no. Mr. Barton. Mr. Barton, no.
Are there other members seeking recognition?
Mr. Melanson. Mr. Melanson votes aye. Mr. Doyle. Mr. Doyle, aye. Mr. Matheson. Mr. Matheson votes aye.
The clerk will report the vote.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, the yeas were 19, the nays were 12.
Okay, the amendment is adopted. Are there other members seeking recognition? The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Amendment 07. I have amendment at the desk.
Amendment offered by Mr. Shimkus to H.R. 3258. In paragraph 2 of Section 1433D of the Safe Drinking Water Act, as amended by Section 2 of the bill, strike, and whether such system is required to submit assessment under subsection G2. Strike subsection G of Section 1433 relating to methods.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read, and the gentleman from Illinois will be recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our committee has heard constant testimony that IST was unnecessary to have security at the plant. Inherently safe technologies is inherently subjective and without a widely accepted definition. Our witness last week made it clear that IST is hard to define and that experts have repeatedly testified before Congress that the government should not be in the business of mandating inherently safer technologies because of significant, and I quote, significant technical challenges that requires more research. Further, the Department of Homeland Security, which is supposed to be helping the EPA tier facilities based on risk, has stated it does not have staff capable of conducting an IST assessment. Since IST is predicated upon tiering and DHS is a bit lost on how this would operate, why would we want to mandate this change? In addition, since IST decision and oversight would be handled by state drinking water regulator, you have a very unique construct where a state environmental regulator is trying to implement an ill-defined federal program that is predicated on guidelines from a federal department that claims it does not know what it is doing. When it comes to drinking water systems, the local officials running these plants, not bureaucrats in some government office complex, need to be the ones making that informed decision concerning disinfectant chemicals and processes after a full analysis. Drinking water utilities tailor their treatment and distribution processes according to regulatory obligations, to critical variations in some water characteristics, and to other local factors. The underlying bill's provisions on methods to reduce do not promote security as much as they push chemical reformulation. For instance, a well-guarded Fort Knox would not be safe enough under this bill and would have to justify why it uses drinking water chemical disinfectant effort it uses. In fact, the American Water Works Association has informed this committee that requirements to change disinfection processes under a mandatory IST regime are very energy intensive, not just driving up the cost of producing safe drinking water for every community in America, but also expanding each utility's carbon footprint. And you know I don't want to do that. I don't want to increase additional carbon footprints in the atmosphere. Local officials are in the best position to evaluate important, unique local factors and to weigh the risk trade-offs, feasibilities, and full range of consequences associated with the availability disinfection processes. Environmental protection and homeland security laws are two different things. IST is an environmental notion masquerading as homeland security. If you want tangible security benefits rather than fanciful notions of safety, opposed mandating IST should not be. I urge support of this amendment, and I yield back my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes himself in opposition to the bill. This amendment would actually strike all language in the bill related to inherently safer technology, including a requirement that water systems simply assess whether they can switch to safer chemicals and processes. The bill before us takes a balanced approach on the issue of inherently safer technology. It recognizes that in some cases a drinking water system can reduce the consequences of a potential terrorist attack by using safer chemicals or processes. That's why this bill gives state regulators the authority to decide whether the highest risk drinking water systems should switch to safer technologies. However, the bill also recognizes that the use of safer chemicals and processes might not be possible in all cases. That's why the state regulator can only order a switch to safer technology after proving it is technologically and economically feasible for a facility to do so. The bill is clear. If switching disinfectants or using a different process would cost too much, isn't feasible for the water system, it would shift the risk around rather than reduce it or would impair water quality. The water system will not have to implement it. The bill balances threat, vulnerabilities, and consequences with the cost to mitigate risk. The inherently safer technology language in this bill is the product of hundreds of hours of discussions with the water sector. The Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies has endorsed the bill. They represent the largest publicly owned drinking water utilities in the country, the ones that would be most likely to be subject to an implementation requirement. The manager's amendment also ensures that the drinking water systems have access to an appeal process if they disagree with the determination of the state regulator or the Environmental Protection Agency. The bill has the support of the regulated industry as well as environmental and labor groups, so I urge my colleagues to vote no on the Shimkus.
Would gentleman yield for 1 second?
I will yield,
you mentioned economically feasible. Who will make that determination?
That determination will be made by the Environmental Protection Agency, the state regulators, in conjunction with a deliberation with the water utilities in the country.
Gentlemen,
so the government has the final say of what is economically feasible, because obviously some of these systems are private and they contract to provide water. Some are government. So the determination is going to be made by government of what's economically feasible.
Ultimately, but the water utility will make the case that it is economically unfeasible, and there will be a forum there. There will be an appeals process if there is a disagreement in the determination made by the EPA or by the state regulator. But it will be a process not unlike any other, cost analysis done with the utility in its relationship with the government.
And if I just one last point of clarification, if inherently safer technology is more expensive and the municipal system then has to bond to put on this new facility, what they will then have to do is pass a bonding measure to the public, which is probably a better determination of what is economically feasible, whether the public is willing then to pay for this versus it being dictated in essence, are determined economically feasible by the government. So that's what part of the problem I have with this, and I thank you for the time, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman, but again, if the costs are too high, then they won't have to do it, okay, as well. So that's the other side of the coin. That determination has to be made whether or not there is, in fact, a cost burden which is not acceptable. And this formula, again, was accepted by the metropolitan water agencies of the country, and those are the ones that really are the principal focus of the legislation, because they are the ones that most likely would be the target, and they've accepted and endorsed this legislation. So the time has expired. Are there other members seeking recognition at this time? The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of the Shimkus amendment, and I see how the votes are going, but I do think that we need to bring at least some clarity and common sense to the debate. The Safe Water Drinking Act is designed to make sure that the water systems of America produce water that is sanitary and hygienic and doesn't have contaminants in it, so that when our population, our constituents drink that water, it's clean and healthy. And I don't think anybody on the committee opposes the most stringent federal and state regulations to make sure that our water supplies meet those standards. Now we have a Homeland Security bill that's using language designed to be used for terrorism or for safety in a combustible sense or something like that. And we're mixing apples and oranges, and we're not trying, I mean, we want the best technology out there that makes the water supply safe in the sense that we can drink the water. Okay? So we're not, I guess it's possible that there is some technology that is more prone to being blown up or combusting or something. I don't believe that to be the case, but I guess it's theoretically possible. So why in the world do we not accept the Shimkus amendment so that we at least try to, if I understand it correctly, compare apples to apples? The minority staff assessment of the pending bill without the Shimkus amendment is that the Homeland Security people are not really sure how this inherently safer technology assessment would operate, because it's a different kind of safe that's used to provide for the safety of the water supply. It's a hygienic, sanitary safety. It's not a terrorism safety. So DHS isn't sure how they're going to operate it, and the state regulators don't have the ability to implement it and are not sure what the program means. So we've got a federal agency that doesn't know what it's doing, trying to tell the state regulators to do something that they don't know what to do. So why in the world do we as the committee insist to do things that seem on the surface to be somewhat stupid? You know, I would hope that we could adopt the Shimkus amendment and bring some sense of balance to this. Just because all these various groups have kind of thrown up their hands and said, well, we see where the mood of the Congress is, I guess we can accept this if we have to, doesn't mean that those of us on the committee and the subcommittee that have jurisdiction can't try to bring some clarity to this. I understand, you know, if we want to do a security bill for water, let's do a security bill for water. Let's don't mix apples and oranges, because we have all these water supplies and they're in all of our districts, and they've spent over 100 years trying to make sure that their supplies are safe for drinking and sanitary purposes. And now we use this standard of inherently safer technology that is subjective by definition, and we're going to throw that on. These water supply systems weren't designed for terrorist protection. They're designed for safety as an entirely different type of safety, Mr. Chairman. So why don't we accept the Shimkus amendment? I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Are there other members seeking recognition? At this time, the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Whitfield, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Frequently, all of us will go out and ask for letters of support from various entities to back up our position, but I actually have received a number of letters on this issue that I did not ask for at all, and the largest water environment authority in my district wrote me a letter specifically about this legislation and talked specifically about the unique characteristics of local issues and the effect that inherent safe technology decisions could have on their ability to guarantee the safety of local water supplies. They're very emphatic that in fact, they say that we maintain that increasing the state and federal oversight and authority on this matter will further restrict our ability to operate in a safe manner because of unique local issues, and we genuinely believe that this will result in higher water costs for our customers. And since local authorities have the utmost dedication and commitment to providing a safe water supply, I genuinely believe that we should support the Shimkus amendment, and so do the largest water supplier in my district.
Will the gentleman yield?
I'd be happy to yield.
I just want to say that sitting through the hearing last week or the week before when we had it, there was some comment that this IST language, and we're going to have the same debate on the chemical bill following the markup of this one, was that New Jersey had this same language, and therefore it has been lifted or whatever and imposed in both bills. But from what I understand, there's an important distinction between what New Jersey has and what we have gone far beyond that in not only this legislation but the chemical security bill, which we're going to be doing later. And that is that it's my understanding that in New Jersey, yes, they do require an assessment, but they don't have a mandate that it actually has to be converted to meet that standard. And what Mr. Shimkus is going to try to do with his amendment and your amendment and the next bill as well is to, in fact, weaken what is in this bill and make it more in line with what the states have done. This is a big step, far and beyond what states have used, and they were using that as an excuse, I guess you could say, at the hearing that we had last week. And so I think this is a good amendment. It's one that we ought to follow through on, and is one of the reasons why there is pretty strong opposition on this side of the aisle to both of these bills as it looks towards expanding the mandate versus looking at the assessment and figuring out what they have to do and actually trying to convert it to meet that IST.
Great.
Unless someone else on this side wants to make a comment, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman yields back. Are there other members seeking recognition? The chair sees none. The vote then comes on the Shimkus amendment. All those in favor signify by the sign of aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. No. Mr.
Chairman.
Noes have it.
Roll call vote, please.
The gentleman from Illinois requests a roll call. The clerk will read the roll.
Mr. Markey.
Votes no.
Mr. Markey votes no. Mr. Doyle. Mr. Doyle votes no. Mr. Inslee. Mr. Inslee, no. Mr. Butterfield. Mr. Butterfield, no. Mr. Melanson. Mr. Melanson, no. Mr. Hill. Mr. Hill, no. Ms. Matsui. Ms. Matsui, no. Mr. McNerney. Mr. McNerney, no. Mr. Welch. Mr. Welch, no. Mr. Dingell. Mr. Boucher. Mr. Pallone. Mr. Pallone votes no. Mr. Engel. Mr. Green. Ms. Capps. Mrs. Capps votes no. Ms. Harmon. Ms. Harmon votes no. Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Gonzalez, no. Ms. Baldwin. Ms. Baldwin, no. Mr. Ross. Mr. Ross, no. Mr. Matheson. Mr. Matheson, no. Mr. Barrow. Mr. Barrow, no. Mr. Waxman. Mr. Upton. Mr. Upton, aye. Mr. Hall. Mr. Hall, aye. Mr. Stearns. Mr. Stearns, aye. Mr. Whitfield. Mr. Whitfield votes aye. Mr. Shimkus. Mr. Shimkus, aye. Mr. Shadegg. Mr. Shadegg, aye. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Pitts. Mr. Pitts votes aye. Ms. Bono-Mack. Ms. Bono-Mack, aye. Mr. Walden. Mr. Walden, aye. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Blunt. I'm sorry, Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess. Aye. Mr. Scalise. Mr. Scalise, aye. Mr. Barton. Mr. Barton votes aye.
Are there other members seeking recognition?
Mr. Waxman. Mr. Waxman. Mr. Waxman votes no. Mr. Green. Mr. Green votes no. Mr. Boucher. Mr. Boucher votes no. Mr. Engel. Mr. Engel votes no.
Are there other members seeking recognition? Chair sees none. The clerk will report the vote.
On that vote, Mr. Chairman, there were 12 ayes and 21 nays.
The amendment is defeated. Now, let me make this announcement, if I may. I will recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton, for the purpose of him introducing his amendment for consideration in the committee. We will postpone a vote on his amendment until 1:15, at which point we will reassemble here, cast the vote on the Upton amendment, and then we will proceed with the rest of the consideration of both the water and the chemical security legislation, so that if members wish to participate in this debate, they may do so, but we would request that they return at approximately 1:15 so that we could have a vote on the Upton amendment. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton, is recognized.
So let me just clarify. So we'll debate this amendment for however long, and when the debate ends, then we'll adjourn and come back to vote at 1:15.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, the gentleman from Michigan.
I have an amendment at the desk, DWS 13.
Amendment offered by Mr. Upton to H.R. 3258 at the end of subsection O of section 1433
I would ask
of
unanimous
the
consent that it be considered as read. Without objection.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this, and I'm intending to offer this almost the same amendment to the next bill as well, and this is one of the major differences, again, between the two sides on this legislation. What this amendment does is it prohibits the application of citizen suit provisions in Section 1449 of the Safe Drinking Water Act from being used in the drinking water security context. The text of the law allows any person to commence a civil action against a covered drinking facility or the EPA alleging a violation of the law or against the EPA for failure to enforce the law. This allows anyone, including possibly a terrorist, to file a civil lawsuit against a covered drinking facility, or the EPA will undoubtedly lead to a sharp increase in litigation. Folks, even in good faith, believe that a covered drinking water facility is in violation and perhaps would file a lawsuit. Lay people are in no position to know when something as complex as a drinking water facility is in violation of that act. The only way for the injured third party to know if a drinking water facility was not in compliance would be to know that the drinking water facility's site security plan, a document protected by this very act. So the administration testified before the House Homeland Security Committee that third-party lawsuits in a security context may lead to the release of sensitive and protected information, quite frankly, information that no one wants to see released. The law currently does not prevent terrorists or their attorneys from hiring or winning these suits and getting access to that very sensitive information. It only requires standing. In a recent nuisance case between the state of Connecticut and the American Electric Power shows that getting standing does not require much effort. So let's be clear, even if the suit fails, as many of them likely will, the amount of money and resources consumed by that effort and the risk of the disclosure of the sensitive information would be tremendous. Finally, I have to ask, why is this provision here? Citizen suits are not a mechanism used to enforce national or homeland security provisions. The Obama administration did not request it, is my understanding, and it should not be left, then, security to the whim of the trial bar. So this provision doesn't need to be in here, doesn't need to be in the next bill either, and what my amendment does is it strikes the provision entirely. Yield back my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes himself to speak in opposition to this amendment. Any effort to exempt security from the Safe Drinking Water Act citizen suit provision would be a dangerous proposition. Enforcement under the Safe Drinking Water Act is split between the states and the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, neither one with the resources to effectively enforce on its own. Without the potential for enforcement through the judicial system, egregious violations could slip through the cracks in this complicated area. Think about a neighbor of one of these facilities who sees a glaring violation, calls the state and is told it's a federal problem. Then he calls EPA and is told it's a state problem. That could happen. Further, the EPA does not have the clean record that the Department of Homeland Security has when it comes to meeting statutory mandates and going after violators. This effort to strip citizen suits does not respond to any concerns from the regulated industry or the agency in charge. The Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies, which represents the largest publicly owned drinking water systems in the country, has endorsed the bill. Not a single other water industry stakeholder with whom we engaged requested that we make this change. This amendment is a solution in search of a problem that the industry itself has not presented. The 2002 Bioterrorism Act created Section 1433 of the Safe Drinking Water Act. This section has been subject to citizen suits since its creation, and no sensitive information has come out as a result. In fact, EPA is unaware of any citizen suits filed under this section at all. I think the amendment is counterproductive, and the industry is not requesting it, and I urge a no vote on the amendment. And I yield back the balance of my time. And I seek to find any other members who wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington State, Mr. Inslee.
Yes, I would speak in opposition to the amendment. I would just point out it's curious to me that the party that I know sincerely believes government virtually never does anything right and has spent the last few months telling Americans that if government does anything involving health care, we're all going to die premature deaths. That same party that when we have a mechanism to enforce the laws of the United States to make sure government does something right doesn't want to allow citizens to have a tool to make sure their government does something right. And the only thing I can figure is that there's more paranoia about the judicial system than there is about the government, I guess. But in this case, the judicial system is simply a way as a last mechanism to make sure that Americans have a government that follows the law. And I just don't think that's something we ought to worry too much about. Thanks.
The gentleman's time has expired. Are there other members seeking recognition to speak on the Upton Amendment? The chair sees none. So the question now occurs on the Upton Amendment. All in favor, vote aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. 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 No. 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 In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Ask for roll call.
The gentleman from Michigan requests a roll call pursuant to the chair's previous announcement. The vote on the Upton Amendment will be postponed until 1:15, and this subcommittee will stand in recess until 1:15, at which point the order of business will be the vote on the Upton Amendment.